accept. My experience is that it's not easier to understand and accept for the general population. Actually, the more ethical argument is easier to understand and actually to accept. Now, of course, we'll argue about building into flagpoles off people's windows and what to do. But why do you believe that it's easier for people to accept it? I mean, you've been making these arguments for so long, and it's not even accepted by economists. Right?
Well, as academics go, economists are the most likely ones to be economists. You will observe that there are almost no economists who support terrorism. The strongest argument, I like to say that the strongest argument against the libertarian is the difficulty of understanding how decentralized coordination is possible. That it seems intuitively that there's got to be someone deciding to do it. That is, you cannot be an economist and not understand that. You can be an economist and say because of the market failure problem we ought to improve on it, especially if you don't think much about the incentives of the political system. But you can't be an economist and not understand how prices work, because that's sort of the core of price theory. Microeconomics, by the way, is a very deceptive term because the world wheat market is a problem in microeconomics. So, micro and macro are the kind of terms that let people feel as though they understand something without having to actually understand it. Proper terms are probably price theory and disequilibrium economics. Because in the simple price theory models, market's always clear, so there is no involuntary unemployment. And then that half of the economics we actually understand and understood for quite a long time. Understanding disequilibrium turns out to be much harder. It's not my field, so all I can really say about it is, as far as I can tell, a class in macro is a tour of either a construction site. Yes.
You gave some examples on, kind of more socialist versus more libertarian societies, and that you don't need the moral argument because you have the actual economic argument for why people would prefer one over the other. But don't you still need the moral argument for the people that are doing the subjugation, the people that are doing the oppressing? Doesn't the moral argument, isn't it still necessary for that libertarian society more so than just the economic argument itself? Because those people who have the power to
persuade the oppressors, you need the moral argument.
Yeah, but meaning that the economic argument doesn't work for them because they're getting all of the benefit.
I think it in fact does work for them. I have one of the chapters in my book, Machinery of Freedom, is called Thieves' Market, or the Non-Existence of the Ruling Class. And the basic idea here is something called rent seeking. And it's easiest to think about it in terms of robbery, but there are lots and lots of other examples. Think about the economics, the market, as it were, for robbery. If anybody, suppose that an individual can make $20,000 a year by working at McDonald's. If he can steal more than $20,000 a year, it pays him to steal. Other people will copy him. The result is, as the number of thieves goes up, the return from theft goes down. And when you are finished in equilibrium, he is stealing $20,000 a year at a cost of $20,000 a year of labor he could use at McDonald's. So therefore, the loss is still there and the gain is not there. That's an example of what we call rent seeking. Rent seeking in general is a situation where people spend resources on transferring rather than on producing, which that was one example. If you think about the political market, it's ultimately a rent-seeking situation where if you can make a good income by being a politician, other people will compete for that. They are driving down the return until you're doing a little better as a politician than you would have done as a lawyer or somebody else using the same skills. But on the other hand, your whole society is poorer. Lawyers are poorer, and because you're consuming large parts of its wealth in doing foolish things. So I think I would argue at least there is no ruling class, at least in anything very much like our society. There might be in one in which you had a hereditary aristocracy where somehow all you had to do was be the son of the right person. But, and therefore I think I'm sure there are a few people, an expert on tax avoidance, for example, may really gain from the fact that we have a government that spends lots of money because his particular talents are valuable in that. But that in general you would expect that in a free society the same talents would get used for something else. So I don't think you have to. The real problem is that it's hard to persuade people of anything that they don't want to believe. On the general issue that was being raised here, however, you can hear a very lengthy discussion of it in the recording of the debate that I had with Gene Epstein here 2 years ago, because it was essentially on this question. As Gene was arguing for the non-aggression postulate, and I was arguing that it was better to base libertarian arguments on consequences of the fact that policies you don't like actually have big consequences. Somebody else? Yes.
I guess kind of what your thoughts are on AI and the potential for it to, I guess, make it so that it can do things a lot more efficiently than your average worker in like large swath of population.
Yeah. About the beginning of the last century, roughly half the population of the U.S. was engaged in agriculture. It's now a few percent. That does not result in unemployment rates of 40%. So I think the answer is that if AI turns out very rapidly to be able to do many things, then there will be a serious transition problem during which people use things. But ultimately, it's making people more productive. And you will then shift things you do. And if you have this sort of imaginary future in which AI produces everything for free, then maybe we will have a communist utopia and we everything will give away. And that's very likely because human wants turn out to be very elastic. The current real income in developed countries is between 20 and 30 times what the average was when it was supposed to be. And yet we don't feel as though we've got too much stuff. But anyway, so no, to me at least, the real AI threat, which I don't know what will happen, but it's possible, is that we may be creating beings who are much smarter than we are. And they may end up, in effect, as people with their own objectives. And as I put it in my book, Future Imperfect, we better hope they like that. Yes?
A moment ago you mentioned that it's hard to persuade anybody of anything. What do you make of arguments that maybe libertarians should use these tools that traditionally leftists and others use, such as emotion in the persuasion in the battle, as opposed to just reason and rationality?
Some people are good at doing that. It's sort of dangerous because there's no particular reason why that's more likely to lead you to a correct conclusion than an incorrect conclusion. But I can't tell other people how they should try to persuade. I don't want to try to persuade people.
I guess I'm asking is, when you're saying it's hard to persuade people of anything, is that saying essentially using that tool of reason as opposed to these other tools, or? But
I think it's hard with the other tools as well, because whatever your emotional argument is, somebody on the other side can turn it around and make an emotional argument the other way. Yes.
Do you have any economic arguments in support or against insider trading? And then a subsidiary question would be specific to members of Congress, if that should be legal or illegal.
I think probably it would be desirable that members of Congress agree contractually, as it were, not to engage in insider trading. The general issue of insider trading is quite tricky, though, because on the one hand, it's got the virtue of getting information out to people other than the insiders in the resulting crisis. On the other hand, it may result in insiders having an incentive to do things other than maximizing profit in order to maximize their return. So my own view is that the right way to handle it is that when a firm is set up, its rules should specify whether or not its insiders are allowed to trade. Then the market can decide it, because the ultimate question is, can you raise capital more or less easily if you have that rule for your corporation? Yes.
When you practice economic analysis of law, it's very analysis to decide whether
But I'm not doing economic analysis of law as a philosopher, I'm doing it as an economist. So the question, the two things I want to understand are, what are the effects of any particular set of legal rules? And what are the reasons that a particular set of legal rules exist? And I try to use economics to answer those questions. Insofar as there is a normative rule implicit but not very implicit in economic analysis of law, it is efficiency. There is a conjecture due to my ex-colleague, Judge Posner, that the common law, the law that developed through the decisions of judges in the Anglo-American system, is economically efficient. You can explain why the rules are what they are by saying this rule maximizes the size of the rule. And economic efficiency, I discussed, I think, a little bit yesterday, is basically take any change. Imagine that you knew for everybody affected how much you would pay to either get it or stop it. Count the amount you would pay to get it as a positive, the amount you would pay to stop it as a negative. If the sum is positive, we call it an increase in economic efficiency. If it's negative, we call it a decrease. And that is a very crude measure of how good it is, because you can think of other things that doesn't cover, but it's I think the best measure that economists are able to answer questions with. And I discussed that a bit yesterday. So in any case, but there's no particular economic analysis of law does not depend either on the belief that the law is efficient or that it should be, but it does try to answer the question what legal rule would be efficient and what effects. But that does not involve if you had a moral view, a particular moral view, if you're an egalitarian, you could use economic analysis of law to figure out what legal rules would result in a more equal society. If you're whatever. But in any case, but if people are curious about economic analysis of law, I have a book on that too. You can also read from my webpage, which is called Law's Order. Yes.
So you used tariffs talking about an example of something most economists agree about, and I think I probably would have agreed with you up until the last few months. It seems like in the age of Trump 2.0, all of a sudden there's more uncertainty about that topic, and at least in the
economists have much uncertainty about it.
I don't know. I mean, I've certainly heard popular commentating economists, comment, at least neutrally, if not favorably, about tariffs, and folks that I'm surprised to.
Well, they may or may not be economists.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about. I mean, I'll just throw out the name like Peter St. Onge, right? Who is an economist. Anyway, he's quite popular these days, and.
But you will notice that both Krugman and I believe that tariffs, on the whole, make the country that imposed them worse off.
Yeah.
And we have more or less opposite.
Well, I agree with you, but I mean,
Krugman. Now, I should say there are exceptions. I've devoted 2 or 3, at least 3 of my Substack posts to the subject of tariffs, and one of them is arguments for tariffs that don't depend on economic ignorance. And one can imagine reasons why you might want a tariff that don't depend on understanding economics, but most of the reasons people support tariffs depend on understanding economics. And in particular, there are circumstances in which a tariff or a export tax can make the country that imposes it richer at the cost of other countries. So there's still a net loss when it is exported. That's not a normal situation, but it's a possible situation. And you might have a case where your objective is not economic efficiency, your objective is to hurt another country. Suppose that we believe that we can cripple the Chinese economy by not buying anything from them, even though it'll make us worse off. That's a cost you're not willing to pay. So there are arguments of that sort that could be made for tariffs. But the straightforward economic argument, which I think is a good deal of what Trump and his supporters depend on, just depends on understanding economics. On not understanding economic ideas that were worked out just over 200 years ago by David Friedman.
Yeah, I'm sure too. If it had been a Biden policy, Krugman would have been supportive of it. But
I'm not even sure that's true for minimum wage, which you can contrast what Krugman said about minimum wages back when he was an academic economist with what he said when he became a public.
I think he sort of illustrates the point I was making, right? Which it seems like there's always some economists willing to pander to the powers that be and tell them what they want to hear.
Yes. Anyway, if people are interested, as I say, my Substack posts are, I have them, I have links to them sorted by topic on my webpage, and you can read the ones on tariffs and get what at least I have to say on the subject.
Thanks.